The wind rolled over the wide, empty plains, whispering through the dry grass and sighing against the old fence posts that marked the edge of Harding Ranch. It was land that once sang with laughter and life, back when the sun rose to the smell of coffee and biscuits and the sound of a woman's voice calling, "Breakfast's ready, Cole." But that was 5 years ago. Now, rancher Cole Harding lived in silence. The house still stood solid, a squat, whitewashed structure weathered by sun and sand, but it felt hollow. Its windows reflected the dusty skies, not the warmth of home. Inside, everything was neat, too neat, as though he kept it that way to stop himself from remembering that nobody else lived there anymore. A framed photograph sat on the mantel, a smiling woman with auburn hair and kind eyes, holding a newborn baby in her arms. The glass was cracked across one corner, but Cole could never bring himself to replace it. That was all he had left of Martha, his wife, his heart, his reason for breathing. 5 years had passed since the fever took her. The doctor rode out too late, and by the time Cole buried her under the cottonwood tree near the stream, the world had already lost its color. After that, the ranch went quiet. The hands left one by one, saying the pay wasn't enough or the place was too lonely, but Cole didn't blame them. He barely spoke, barely ate, barely slept. He threw himself into work, mending fences, breaking horses, herding cattle, but the silence always crept back in once the sun went down. The people in town whispered about him. They said he was cursed, or that he'd gone half crazy out there with his ghosts. Kids pointed when he came in for supplies, their mothers hushing them and saying, "That's the ghost rancher." He didn't care what they thought. The only thing that mattered was keeping the ranch running, keeping something of Martha's alive. That morning, the sun rose over the ridges in a blaze of gold, and Cole was already out by the north pasture. The fence had been giving trouble lately, posts rotted by rain and wire sagging under the weight of time. He worked in silence, his hands calloused, the smell of dust and sweat clinging to him. His horse, an old sorrel named Buster, grazed lazily nearby. Every so often, Cole would pause, leaning on his hammer, and stare off toward the horizon where the land met the sky. It was endless, empty, and yet it always made him feel trapped. He drove the next post into the ground and wiped the sweat from his brow when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Soft, high-pitched, like laughter carried by the wind. He frowned, straightened, and looked around. Nothing. The land stretched flat and open, the only movement a hawk circling overhead. He turned back to his work. Then came the sound again, a whisper of giggles, then a tiny voice. Cole turned sharply, and that's when he saw them. 2 small figures stood on the other side of the fence. Girls, no older than 6 or 7, dressed in worn calico dresses streaked with dust. One had her hair in messy braids, the other's curls were wild and tangled. Their faces were smudged, their shoes torn, but their eyes, wide and bright, were fixed on him with a mix of awe and hope. He blinked, certain he was imagining things. He hadn't seen children here in years. The taller one nudged her sister and took a timid step forward. "Mister?" she called, her voice trembling. Cole set his tools down slowly. "You girls lost?" The smaller one shook her head, clutching the other's hand tightly. Then, with a courage that sounded rehearsed but fragile, the taller one spoke again. "Mister, can you please just be our daddy for today?" The words struck him like a bullet straight through the chest. For a moment, the wind seemed to stop. Cole stared, unable to speak, unable to breathe. In their little faces, in their eyes, green like the grass after rain, he saw something he hadn't felt in years. A stirring, an ache, a ghost of the life he'd lost. And though he didn't yet know it, those 2 small strangers standing by his fence were about to change everything. For a long moment, Cole Harding just stood there, staring at the 2 little girls as if they had stepped out of one of his dreams, or maybe one of his nightmares. The air between them hung still, broken only by the lazy buzz of grasshoppers and the faint creak of the fence wire swaying in the breeze. He hadn't spoken to a child in years. He hardly spoke to anyone at all. The taller girl, Lila, as he'd soon learn, looked about 6, maybe 7. She was a thin, wiry thing with stubborn eyes and a chin that tilted up like she was used to protecting her sister. The smaller one, June, had the same features but softer, her curls wild as tumbleweed, her gaze full of that wide-eyed trust only children seem to carry. They were holding hands tightly, the way orphans do when the world's been unkind. "Mister," Lila repeated, a little louder this time, "we didn't mean to scare you. We were looking for someone nice." Cole blinked. "Someone nice?" His voice came out rough, more like a growl than a question. The girls nodded in unison. "Someone who could maybe—" Lila hesitated, stealing a glance at June before finishing. "Be our daddy for a day." He felt the ground shift beneath him. For a moment, he thought maybe the sun had gotten to him. Maybe he was hearing things. "Your daddy?" he managed to repeat. June nodded, her little face earnest. "Mama says it helps her heart when we have a daddy round, just for pretend." Cole stared at them, dusty dresses, scraped knees, empty hands, and felt his throat tighten. They were too clean to be beggars, too polite to be wild strays, but too ragged to belong to anyone nearby. Their shoes were worn near through, their hair tangled, their cheeks smudged with travel dust. He noticed a small, patched satchel slung across Lila S.'s shoulder and a ragged blanket rolled up in June S.'s arms. "Where's your ma?" he asked finally. Lila pointed toward the horizon, where the road curved behind a low hill. "She's restin'. In the wagon. She's been real tired." Cole's brow furrowed. "You came here alone?" June shook her head quickly. "Buster helped." "Buster?" Lila's mouth twisted in a small, proud smile. "Our mule. He's slow, but he don't give up." Cole felt a flicker of something deep inside, something that hadn't stirred in a long time. Maybe pity, maybe recognition. He looked past them, toward the sun-baked road, but saw no wagon in sight, only heat shimmering off the sand. He could have told them to leave. Should have. A man living alone didn't need the company of 2 stray children, especially not ones asking him to play father. But something in the way they looked at him stopped the words in his throat. He cleared his voice. "You girls eaten anything today?" June's eyes brightened at the mention of food, but she stayed silent, letting Lila speak. "We had some bread this morning," she said softly. "It was old. Mama said she'd get us something better once she wakes up." Cole's heart twisted again. He'd seen hard times before, orphans during droughts, widows trying to keep homesteads alive. But there was something about these 2 that didn't fit the pattern. They weren't broken. They were brave, holding themselves together for someone else's sake. He leaned against the fence, looking down at them. "I'm not much good at pretending," he said gruffly. "And I sure ain't nobody's daddy." Lila met his eyes then, bold and steady. "That's okay. You can just act like it for a little while. Mama says it don't have to be forever, just enough to help her rest." Her words hit him harder than she could have known, because for years all Cole had wanted was one more day, just one, with the woman buried under the cottonwood tree. He sighed and tipped his hat back. "All right," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "Let's go see your mama." The girls' faces lit up like dawn breaking over the prairie. They clasped each other's hands and hurried ahead, leading him toward the distant wagon. As he followed, he couldn't shake the strange feeling crawling through his chest, that the wind had just shifted, that something long dead inside him had begun to stir. He didn't know it yet, But that walk down the dusty road toward a worn-out wagon was the first step back toward life. The road was quiet except for the steady crunch of boots and small feet against the dry earth. The sun sat low and hazy above the hills, painting the land in amber light. Cole Harding walked a few paces behind the two little girls, his long shadow stretching over them as they led him toward their wagon. Every step stirred 100 questions in his mind. Who they were, where they came from, and why they'd picked him, of all people, to be their daddy for a day. The girls didn't talk much as they walked. Now that the first burst of bravery had passed, they seemed shy again, whispering to each other as though afraid to scare him off. Lila, the older one, walked straight-backed, holding her head high like she'd promised her mother to be strong. June, smaller and quieter, kept close to her sister's side, glancing over her shoulder at Cole every few steps with cautious curiosity. When they reached the wagon, Cole saw at once how bad things really were. It wasn't much more than an old freight wagon, its canvas cover torn in places, one wheel patched crudely with rope and wire. A mule stood tied to the hitching post, head lowered, ribs showing through its coat. The girls' few belongings were scattered nearby, a tin cup, a small trunk, a threadbare doll missing an arm. And there, lying in the shade of the wagon, was their mother. She was pale, her skin drawn tight, her clothes worn but clean. Her auburn hair, faded and tangled, clung to her face. Even from where he stood, Cole could see the exhaustion etched deep into her features. Her hands, folded over her chest, trembled with every shallow breath. "Ma," Lila said softly, kneeling beside her. "Ma, we brought someone." The woman stirred weakly, her lashes fluttering open. Her eyes, gray, soft, weary, found her daughter's first, then drifted to Cole. For a long second, neither spoke. Then, with effort, she pushed herself up a little on her elbows. "You girls shouldn't trouble anyone," she whispered, her voice faint but warm. "I told you. We don't beg." Cole knelt beside her, his hat in his hands. "They didn't beg, ma'am. They just asked for a daddy." A faint smile touched her lips, one that carried both gratitude and pain. "They miss their father," she said. "He's gone. Been gone a long while now." Cole hesitated. "How long you been traveling?" "Too long," she said simply. "We left the mining town after the owner turned us out. The girls got sick there, and I thought if we kept moving, maybe we'd find work or kind hearts somewhere along the way." She coughed, clutching her chest, and the girls immediately reached to steady her. June's little voice trembled. "Mama, we can stay here, right? Mister said he'd be our daddy for today." Cole froze, caught between confusion and an ache he couldn't name. The woman's tired eyes lifted to him again, full of apology. "They mean no harm. I tell them stories sometimes, about good men who still exist in this world. Guess they believed one might be real." He swallowed hard, looking away toward the horizon. The sun's glare blurred his vision, but not enough to hide the shape of those two small girls kneeling beside their mother, dusty, hungry, and still somehow full of hope. When he looked back, the woman's hand was shaking as she reached for her daughter's. "We'll move on soon," she whispered. "Just needed to rest a little. I didn't mean to trouble you, mister." "Trouble me?" Cole muttered. "Ain't trouble if someone's dying in my pasture." Her lips twitched in a weak smile. "You've got a kind heart. I can see that. That's all they wanted, to feel safe, even for a day." Lila looked up at him, her green eyes shining with that same stubborn courage he'd noticed earlier. "Please, mister, just until Mama feels better. You don't gotta do nothing fancy. Just be here, like a daddy would." Cole felt the breath leave his lungs. Something deep inside him cracked, a place he'd de-sealed shut years ago under layers of grief and dust. He didn't know why he cared, or why he couldn't walk away. Maybe it was those eyes, or maybe it was the faint echo of Martha's voice in his memory, reminding him what kind of man he used to be. He took a slow breath, looked at the woman, then the girls, and said quietly, "All right, I'll stay. For today." The twins smiled through their tears. The woman closed her eyes in relief. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, Cole Harding, once the loneliest man in Texas, found himself sitting by a stranger's fire, not knowing that the family he'd just met was about to rewrite the rest of his life. The fire crackled low that evening, sending ribbons of smoke up into the cooling dusk. Cole Harding sat on an old crate near the wagon, his hat resting on his knee, the smell of coffee and burning mesquite wrapping around the camp. Across from him, the two little girls, Lila and June, sat close to their mother, who leaned weakly against a folded blanket for support. The woman had insisted on sitting up to share a meal, though Cole could tell by the trembling in her hands that even lifting the tin cup took effort. He'd brought them water from the well and a few biscuits from his own kitchen, hardly enough to call supper, but the girls ate as if it were a feast. Their mother only nibbled, watching her daughters with the softest smile. Cole found his eyes drawn to her face again and again, as if trying to make sense of something that refused to fit. There was a strange familiarity about her, something in the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheek, the faint dimple that appeared when she smiled at the girls. Her hair caught the firelight, a deep auburn that shone gold at the edges. It made his heart stumble, because it was the same shade as Martha's hair, his late wife's. He tried to shake the thought off. This woman couldn't possibly be connected to his past, but the resemblance was haunting enough that he found himself staring longer than was polite. Finally, the woman noticed his gaze. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. "You keep looking at me like I'm a ghost," she said softly. Cole blinked and looked away, his ears burning. "Didn't mean nothing by it, ma'am. Just thought you reminded me of someone I used to know." "Someone you lost," she guessed, her tone gentle, almost knowing. He nodded once, slowly. "My wife. Long time ago." The woman's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. Loss like that doesn't fade, does it?" Cole didn't answer right away. The flames popped and the twins' laughter carried faintly from where they played with his dog, Buster, near the fence. It had been years since laughter filled his land. He'd forgotten how much he missed the sound. Finally, he muttered, "No, don't fade. You just learn to live around it." She nodded, her gaze distant. "I know what that's like." After a long silence, he said, "You got a name, ma'am?" "Emma," she replied. "Emma Rivers." The name didn't ring a bell, but the moment she said it, something about it tugged faintly at him. Maybe it was just the tone of her voice, soft, tired, but carrying an undercurrent of quiet strength. Cole noticed how her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the cup again, how her shoulders shook beneath the worn shawl. "You're sick," he said plainly. Emma smiled faintly, as though she'd expected that question. "Just tired. It comes and goes. You need a doctor." "There's no money for one," she said simply. "Besides, I've been worse. The girls keep me going. I'll be fine in the morning." Cole wanted to argue, but something about her tone stopped him. She wasn't asking for help or pity, just dignity. He respected that. Still, as the evening grew colder, he fetched an old wool blanket from his saddlebag and offered it to her. She hesitated before accepting, whispering a quiet, "Thank you." When the girls finally grew sleepy, Emma laid them in the wagon under a quilt and turned back to Cole. "They didn't mean to trouble you," she said softly. "They just miss having someone to call Daddy. I guess they thought maybe if they said it out loud, the world would listen." Her words struck something deep in him. He thought of Martha, how she'd once talked about wanting a house full of laughter and little feet, How life had taken that dream from them too soon. Now, staring at those two girls curled together in sleep, he felt that old ache rising again, the ache of something unfinished. "You can rest easy tonight," Cole said finally. "You and the girls. You're safe here." Emma's eyes shimmered faintly in the firelight. "Thank you, Mr. Harding. Truly." He nodded, pulling his hat low as he stood to leave. But as he turned toward his house, he caught one last glimpse of her face illuminated by the fire, pale, gentle, hauntingly familiar. And though he couldn't name why, a chill ran down his spine. Because for the first time since Martha's death, Cole Harding wasn't sure whether he was remembering the past or staring straight at it. The next morning dawned with a pale gold sky, the kind that promised warmth but still carried a chill from the night. Cole Harding woke before the rooster crowed, as he always did, but the sounds outside were different now. Instead of silence, he heard soft giggles, tiny footsteps on the porch, and the scrape of a tin bucket being dragged across the dirt. When he stepped out, Lila and June were already up, trying to fetch water from the pump. The bucket was far too big for them, and they were soaked from their efforts. But their laughter filled the air like sunlight. For a man who'd lived with ghosts for years, that laughter felt like a balm. "Looks like y'all are flooding my yard," he said, his voice rough with sleep. The girls turned, startled, then burst into smiles. "We was helping," June declared proudly. "Mama says good girls help before breakfast." Cole chuckled, something he hadn't done in a long time. "Well, looks like you're doing a fine job of drowning my pump." He ruffled June's curls, and she squealed with delight. Lila beamed, pleased by the sound. Emma was still asleep in the wagon, her face pale but peaceful. She'd grown stronger since resting at the ranch, but her sickness hadn't entirely loosened its grip. Cole had offered to fetch the town doctor, but she refused, too proud, or perhaps too scared of the cost. After breakfast, Cole saddled his horse to check the southern fence line. The girls followed him halfway, asking endless questions about the ranch, how many cattle he had, whether the horses had names, if they could ride one someday. Their energy was endless. When he returned an hour later, Emma was awake, standing near the fire with the twins at her side. The wind tugged gently at her hair, and she looked stronger, more herself. But as he approached, something caught his eye, a small locket dangling from her neck, glinting in the sunlight. The sight hit him like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just any trinket. It was the locket. Gold, heart-shaped, with a faint engraving of wildflowers along the edge. He'd given one exactly like it to Martha, his wife, on their wedding day. His hands went cold. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Emma blinked, startled. "This? It was given to me," she said carefully. "By who?" His eyes locked on hers, searching. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the chain. "It belonged to my sister. She passed some years ago." Cole's pulse quickened. "Your sister?" Emma nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "Her name was Martha." The world seemed to tilt. The ground beneath him, the air around him, all of it blurred. His breath caught somewhere in his throat. "Martha Harding?" he managed to say. Emma's eyes widened in shock. You knew her?" "Knew her?" His voice cracked, rough and raw. "She was my wife." For a moment, neither of them moved. The girls looked between them, confused, sensing the shift in the air. The locket glinted again in Emma's shaking hands. She seemed torn between shame and sorrow. "She never told me she was married," Emma whispered. "Not until near the end. She was so sick. Fever took her fast. She made me promise to protect the girls and to find you. Someday." "The girls?" Cole repeated, his voice barely a breath. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said. "Your girls, Cole." His heart stopped. The twins, Lila and June, were playing nearby, tossing pebbles into the dirt, the same green eyes, the same dimpled smile. All this time, he'd wondered why something about them had felt familiar. Now he knew. He took a step back, trying to breathe, but the weight of the revelation crushed him. "You mean to tell me? Those little girls are mine?" Emma nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid you'd hate me, for keeping them, for not coming sooner." Cole turned his gaze toward the twins again, his heart pounding, his world spinning. He'd spent years mourning a wife who died before her time, never knowing she'd left behind the very family he'd dreamed of. His voice broke as he whispered, "My girls." Emma bowed her head, her tears falling silently. "They deserve to know who you are, Cole, and you deserve to know them. I just didn't know how to begin." The wind carried the scent of wild sage across the fields. Cole's knees felt weak as he looked at the children, the pieces of Martha he had thought were lost forever. In that moment, all the years of loneliness, grief, and silence crashed into him, and though his heart trembled with disbelief, something deep inside whispered the truth. He was no longer alone. The air on the Harding Ranch grew heavier that afternoon, thick with the scent of rain and something else, unspoken emotion. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, their shadows stretching long across the prairie. Inside the small ranch house, tension hung like thunder about to break. Cole stood by the window, staring out toward the fields where lightning flickered on the horizon. Behind him, Emma sat at the wooden table, twisting the locket in her hands. The twins, Lila and June, were asleep in the spare room, their small breaths soft against the rising wind. Neither Cole nor Emma had spoken much since the truth came out. The silence between them wasn't cold, but it was heavy. Every word unsaid carried a weight neither knew how to lift. At last, Emma broke it. "You have every right to be angry," she said quietly. "I would be too." Cole turned, his jaw tight. "Angry? I don't even know what I am right now." He walked closer, his boots thudding softly against the floorboards. "I buried my wife, Emma. I grieved her for years. And now I find out she lived long enough to give me them. And I never knew." Emma's eyes glistened. "She didn't mean to hide them from you. When the fever took her, she could barely speak. All she said was your name, and to take the girls somewhere safe. She thought you were dead, Cole. The letter she got said you'd been killed in a cattle raid near Santa Fe." Cole froze. "A letter?" She nodded. "It was from a man who claimed to have fought beside you. He said you'd been shot and buried with the others. Martha was heartbroken. She never recovered after that." Cole sank into the chair opposite her, running a hand over his face. The memory of that time flashed through his mind, how he'd been ambushed while driving cattle, left for dead. He'd crawled miles to a trading post, half alive. By the time he made it home, Martha was gone, her grave marked with a simple wooden cross and no answers. "So she thought I was the one who died," he whispered. Emma nodded. "And I thought I was doing right by her. I took the girls and ran because she begged me to. I didn't even know where to find you." Cole's chest ached. The pain wasn't anger. It was heartbreak all over again, the kind that reached deep, where old scars never fully healed. He looked at Emma, seeing her differently now, not as a stranger, but as the woman who'd carried his children through loss, fear, and hunger. Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the walls. The wind howled, rattling the windows. Cole stood abruptly. "We need to bring the animals in before the storm hits." He strode to the door, grabbing his hat and coat, but Emma followed him. "Let me help." He shook his head. "You stay with the girls. They'll wake scared." "I can do both," she said firmly. There was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. Cole hesitated, then nodded once. Together they hurried outside as rain began to fall, first a drizzle, then sheets of water pouring from the sky. Lightning flashed across the horizon as they wrangled the horses and herded the cattle into the barn. Mud splashed, wind roared, but they worked in perfect rhythm, wordless and fierce. When the last of the animals were secured, they ducked inside the barn for shelter. Both were drenched, breathing hard. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the rain pounding the roof like a heartbeat. "You didn't have to stay," Cole said quietly. "You could have left once you knew I was alive." Emma looked up, her hair plastered to her face. "And take your girls away from their father? After all she wanted was for them to find you?" He looked at her then, not just with grief, but with gratitude. "You kept them safe," he said. "Through all of it. You did what I couldn't." She smiled faintly, tears mixing with rain. "We did what we had to." Outside, the storm raged, but inside that barn, something shifted. The distance between them, years of loss, guilt, and loneliness, began to close. The lightning illuminated their faces, two souls scarred by fate but bound by the same promise: family. As thunder rolled across the plains, Cole's gaze softened. "They're my daughters," he whispered, almost to himself. Emma nodded. "Yes, and they already love you." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Then I reckon I better learn how to be their daddy." The rain fell harder, washing the dust of the past from the land and from their hearts. For the first time in years, Cole felt something like hope stir within him. But neither of them knew that when the storm cleared, something or someone was coming that would test that hope more than ever before. By dawn, the Harding Ranch was bathed in a pale, silvery light. A thin mist rolled off the low fields, and the cries of distant coyotes faded into the coming day. Cole Harding rose early, as he always did, but that morning felt different. The silence he'd grown used to, the heavy, hollow quiet that had been his only companion for years, was no longer there. It was replaced by the faintest sounds of life, the low murmur of voices, the creak of a wagon, and the soft laughter of two little girls. He stepped out onto his porch, mug of coffee steaming in his hand, and looked toward the fence. The sight waiting for him was almost unreal. The two girls, Lila and June, were sitting cross-legged near the fire pit, braiding blades of grass and talking to his old dog, Buster, who wagged his tail as if he'd found himself a pair of new best friends. Their mother, Emma, was awake too, leaning against the wagon's wheel, her face pale but no longer ghostly. She looked fragile but alive, like a flower that had barely survived a storm. Cole hadn't planned on getting involved any further. He'd done his part, he told himself, given them food, water, and a night's rest, but something in him wouldn't let him send them away. Not yet. There was a tug inside his chest, a quiet voice that kept saying just one more day. He cleared his throat and walked down toward them. "Mornin'," he said gruffly. The girls looked up instantly, smiles wide. "Mornin', Mr. Harding," Lila chirped. "We were talking to your dog. He listens real nice." Buster barked once as if to agree. Cole set his coffee mug down and nodded toward the wagon. "How's your mama feeling?" Emma lifted her gaze to him, her voice soft. "Better, I think. I can't thank you enough for letting us stay the night. We'll be gone by midday. I don't want to impose." He frowned. "You ain't imposing. You're half-starved and that mule looks ready to keel over. You'll stay till you're strong enough to travel proper." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but the firmness in his tone silenced her. She nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her tired eyes. "Thank you." The girls, they needed a safe place even for a little while. Cole spent the rest of the morning fixing up the old barn loft, clearing out the dust and laying down some clean hay for the girls to sleep on. The twins followed him everywhere, chattering non-stop. Lila asked questions about every tool he picked up, what it did, how it worked, while June insisted on feeding Buster and brushing his tail. Their laughter echoed through the barn, light and musical, cutting through the gloom that had hung there for years. At noon, Cole invited them all into the house. The girls gasped at the sight of the big wooden table and the shelves lined with old photographs and books. "It's like a palace," June whispered, running her hand along the polished chair rail. Emma tried to keep them quiet, embarrassed by their excitement, but Cole only smiled faintly. "Ain't much of a palace," he said, "but it's got a roof and a kitchen. You're welcome to both." While he prepared lunch, salted pork, biscuits, and a pot of beans, the girls sat at the table, legs swinging, giggling at Buster's attempts to beg for food. For the first time in years, Cole's house felt alive again. The air that once carried only the creak of old wood and the whistle of wind now held the sound of laughter. He caught Emma watching her daughters with quiet affection, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "They haven't laughed like this in a long time," she said softly. "You've done more for them in a day than I could in months." Cole looked down at his plate. "Ain't doing much, just giving them what any man ought to." She smiled faintly. "That's exactly why it means so much." Later that evening, after the meal and chores were done, the twins dozed off near the hearth, Buster curled beside them. Cole stood at the doorway, watching the soft glow of lamplight flicker across their faces. The warmth in his chest was unfamiliar, uncomfortable almost, but not unwelcome. Emma's voice came from behind him, quiet and grateful. "You didn't have to do any of this, Mr. Harding, but I'm glad you did." He turned slightly, meeting her gaze. "Maybe I needed it just as much as they did." Outside, the wind whispered through the fields, soft and forgiving. For the first time in years, the old ranch didn't feel empty. It felt like home again, if only for a night. Night settled softly over the Harding Ranch, the kind of still, wide night that stretched on forever beneath a sky scattered with stars. The air was cool, smelling faintly of sage and dry earth. The twins had long since fallen asleep by the fire, curled together under a quilt, with Buster lying protectively nearby. Cole Harding sat a few feet away, the rim of his hat tilted low, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. Across from him, Emma Rivers watched the flames flicker, her face calm yet shadowed by exhaustion and thoughts unspoken. It had been a long day, longer for her than for him. She'd spent most of the afternoon resting in the wagon, her color slowly returning. Cole had busied himself fixing her wagon's wheel, feeding the mule and chopping wood. But now, as the silence grew heavier and the night deepened, he sensed the time had come for the questions he'd been holding back all day. "You said your husband's gone," he began quietly, not wanting to wake the girls. "Mind if I ask how long?" Emma looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. 2 years now," she said softly. "He was a miner up near Dry Creek. A cave-in took him. There wasn't even a body to bury." Cole nodded slowly, the lines around his mouth tightening. He'd seen enough men die that way, suffocated under the earth while chasing silver and fool-ass gold. "That's hard," he murmured. "Harder with young'uns to feed." Emma's gaze drifted toward the sleeping twins. "It was," she admitted. "At first folks in town helped, but pity runs dry faster than water in a drought. I took work where I could, cooking, washing, mending clothes, but it was never enough. The mine owners' men, they weren't kind. So I left." "On your own?" She nodded. "Didn't have a choice. I had to keep the girls safe." Cole studied her face, the weariness, the faint tremor in her hands, the quiet determination beneath it all. There was a strength in her that reminded him of Martha, though the pain behind her eyes was different, deeper, more recent. "Where were you headed?" he asked. Emma shrugged lightly. "Anywhere that'd let me work for a roof and food. I thought maybe west, toward Abilene. Heard there's a family there that takes in widows and gives them honest work." He poked at the fire with a stick, the embers glowing red. "That's a hard road, especially with 2 young'uns." "I know," she said. But staying put was worse. The man who owned the mine, he said I owed him money, said my husband borrowed against future wages. When I couldn't pay, he told me he'd take the girls as help. Her voice cracked slightly. That's when we ran. Cole's hand clenched around his cup. He threatened your children? Emma nodded. He said it was the law, that I couldn't prove otherwise. But I wasn't about to let him lay a finger on them. So we left at night and never looked back. The fire popped, sending sparks swirling into the dark. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The prairie stretched endless around them, quiet except for the distant call of an owl. Finally, Cole said, his voice low but firm, "You did right leaving. Any man comes after your girls here, he'll have to go through me first." Emma's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You hardly know us, Mr. Harding. Why would you care so much?" He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "Maybe I just don't like bullies. Maybe I've lost enough already." She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "You're a good man, Cole Harding. My girls see it too. They trust you." He looked up at her then, really looked. At the quiet courage in her face, the warmth she carried even through her weariness. For a brief second, he felt something stir, something dangerous, tender, and long buried. "I ain't sure what I am anymore," he muttered. "But I reckon I'm better with you three around." Emma turned her gaze back to the stars, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe we both needed to find each other." The fire crackled softly between them, the flames reflecting in her eyes like distant memories. Above them, the night sky stretched wide and forgiving, as if keeping their shared secrets safe beneath its blanket of stars. Neither of them knew it yet, but this fragile trust, the kind built in quiet moments between lost souls, was about to uncover truths that would change everything they believed about the past and about family. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the Harding ranch glistening with rain and silence. Puddles shimmered across the yard, and the air was fresh, washed clean of dust and grief. The world felt new, but not for long. Inside the ranch house, Cole was teaching Lila and June how to mend a fence rail with small wooden hammers. Their giggles echoed through the room, bright as sunlight. Watching them, Emma felt peace settle in her chest for the first time in years. For one precious day, it truly felt like a home, a family. But that peace didn't last. By midday, a shadow appeared on the horizon. A rider on a dark horse, moving slow but certain. Cole noticed him first. He stepped out onto the porch, hand resting instinctively on the revolver at his hip. Something about the man's posture set his instincts on edge. The rider stopped at the gate, tipping his hat. He was tall, lean, and wore a fine brown coat that didn't match the dusty land around him. His mustache was neatly trimmed, and his boots were polished, too polished for a rancher. "Morning," he drawled. "Name's Frank Dillard. I'm looking for a woman traveling with 2 girls. Name's Emma Rivers. You seen her?" The mention of Emma's name froze the air. Cole didn't move. "Can't say I have," he said evenly. "What's your business with her?" Frank's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She ran off owing money. Belongs to the Dry Creek Mining Company. Her husband died owing us, and she's been dodging that debt ever since." Cole's eyes narrowed. "That so?" "Afraid so," Frank continued. "Company's been patient, but she took off with valuable property. Some jewelry, maybe coin, maybe something else. My job's to bring her back. Peacefully, if possible." By then, Emma had stepped quietly onto the porch behind Cole. The moment Frank saw her, his grin widened. "Well, there she is. Save me the trouble." Emma's face went pale. "Frank, please," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. That locket—" Frank cut her off with a cold chuckle. "I understand fine. You took something that wasn't yours, and now you begot 2 brats and a dead man's name tangled up in it." Cole's hand flexed near his holster. "Watch your mouth," he warned. Frank turned his gaze on him, unbothered. "And who might you be, cowboy?" "I'm the man whose land you're standing on," Cole said, his voice low and steady. "And I don't take kindly to strangers threatening women or children under my roof." The tension thickened. The twins peeked out from the doorway, sensing danger. Emma's hand went to her heart, where the locket rested. "Frank, that locket wasn't stolen," she said. "It belonged to my sister. She gave it to me before she died." Frank sneered. "Funny thing, stories change when the law gets involved." He dismounted, stepping closer. "Now you can come quiet, or I can drag you." Before he could take another step, Cole's voice cut through the air like thunder. "You'll do no such thing." Frank's eyes flashed with arrogance. "You planning to stop me?" Cole didn't answer. He didn't have to. The way he stood, the steel in his gaze made it clear. He'd defended his land before, and he'd do it again. The air crackled between them. A hawk cried somewhere overhead. For a moment, it seemed the prairie itself was holding its breath. Frank finally chuckled darkly. "You think this ends here, rancher? You're a fool if you do. The company don't forget, and they don't forgive." He turned his horse, pausing just long enough to look back. "You best watch yourself, Harding. You're harboring a fugitive, and her debt's coming due." With that, he rode off, dust trailing behind him like smoke. Cole stood silent, eyes following the disappearing figure until he was just a speck on the horizon. Then he turned to Emma, who was trembling. "You need to tell me everything," he said firmly. Tears welled in her eyes. "He won't stop, Cole. He'll come back. They always do." Cole's jaw tightened. "Then let him. He'll find more than he bargained for this time." Emma looked up at him, fear and hope warring in her gaze. "You can't fight a company, Cole. They'll come with papers, men, guns." "Then I'll be ready," he interrupted. "You and those girls are safe here. I promise you that." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly again, though the sky was clear. It wasn't weather this time. It was trouble brewing. And Cole knew deep down the next storm wouldn't bring rain. It would bring reckoning. The next morning dawned clear and cold, but there was no peace in the air. The sky over the Harding ranch burned gold at the edges, a false calm before the storm that everyone could feel coming. Cole Harding saddled his horse early, scanning the distant road for any sign of riders. He knew Frank Dillard would return, and not alone. Inside, Emma Rivers was packing a small satchel with trembling hands. The twins, Lila and June, watched silently, confusion in their eyes. They'd felt the tension, too, even if no one had told them why. "Mama," Lila asked softly, "are we leaving again?" Emma froze, then knelt down and gathered both girls into her arms. "I hope not, sweetheart. But if I tell you to hide, you do it, no matter what." June clutched her mother's skirt. "But what about Mr. Harding?" Emma swallowed hard. "He'll take care of you. He always keeps his promises." Just then, Cole appeared in the doorway, his expression grim but calm. "They're coming," he said. "5 of 'em, riding fast." Emma's heart lurched. "Please, Cole, don't do this. They'll have papers, guns." He met her eyes steadily. "And I've got something stronger. The truth." He turned and strode out onto the porch, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. Dust rose on the horizon, and within minutes, Frank Dillard and 4 hired men rode into view. They stopped at the gate, just like before, but this time they didn't smile. Frank dismounted first, waving a folded paper. "By order of the Dry Creek Mining Company," he said loudly. "Emma Rivers is to be taken into custody for theft and debt evasion. Anyone aiding her will face charges." Cole stepped forward, his voice steady as stone. "This land's under my name. You've got no authority here." Frank smirked. "You planning to fight the law, Harding?" Cole's jaw tightened. "I'll fight liars, and I'll fight bullies." He nodded toward Emma, who now stood in the doorway clutching the locket. That woman don't owe your company a damn thing. That locket belonged to my wife, her sister Martha Harding. You know the name." The men exchanged uneasy looks. Frank's smirk faltered just for a moment. "That's a story. You got proof?" Cole's eyes blazed. "You're standing on it. The death records, the grave marker in Dry Creek, they'll tell you Martha Harding was declared dead after that cave-in. But she wasn't just another miner's widow. She was my wife. That locket you're calling stolen? I gave it to her on our wedding day." Frank hesitated, his confidence cracking. "Even if that's true, the debt—" "There is no debt," Cole snapped. "You forged it to keep widows work in the mine. I've seen men like you. You prey on the ones who can't fight back, but she's not alone now." At that, Cole's hand hovered near his holster, and the air turned electric. The hired men shifted nervously, uncertain. The tension stretched thin as a wire. Then Emma's voice rang out, clear and trembling. "He's telling the truth. I ran because you lied. You threatened to take my daughters?" That last word, daughters, hung heavy in the air. Cole's gaze flicked toward Lila and June, peeking from behind the doorway. His heart ached, but his stance stayed firm. Frank's eyes darted from the girls to the locket, then to Cole. For a moment his sneer faltered completely. The men behind him looked uneasy, clearly not eager to draw on a man protecting 2 children and a grieving woman. Finally, Frank spat in the dirt. "You're making a mistake, Harding. The company won't forget this." Cole's voice was cold as steel. "Then tell him to come for me, not her." Frank hesitated, then swung up onto his horse. "This ain't over," he said, but there was no conviction left in his tone. Within moments, the men rode off, their figures shrinking against the open plains until they vanished. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma sagged against the porch rail, tears spilling down her face. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They'll come back." Cole holstered his gun, his expression softening. "Let 'em. I've been living half a life since Martha died, but now—" He looked toward the twins, their small faces framed in the doorway. "Now I've got something worth fighting for again." Emma's breath caught. "Cole—" He stepped closer, gently taking her trembling hand. "You don't have to run anymore, Emma. You and those girls, my girls, you belong here. If you'll stay." For a long heartbeat, all she could do was stare at him. Then, with tears in her eyes, she nodded. "We'll stay." The twins burst from the doorway, running into Cole's arms. He lifted them both, one on each side, their laughter spilling out like music. Emma watched through tears as the rising sun broke through the clouds, bathing the ranch in golden light. The storm was over, inside and out. Cole looked at the girls, then at her, his voice steady and full of quiet emotion. "Guess I'm their daddy now, not just for today." Emma smiled through her tears. "No, Cole, for always." And as the prairie wind swept across the land, carrying the scent of rain and renewal, the Harding Ranch stood not as a place of loss, but of second chances, love reborn, and a family finally made whole.